So welcome back. Take your seats. And here we go. So I'm particularly delighted to welcome Jonathan Kanter, AAG for the Department of Justice, whose tenure is not being that long. It's less than 2 years, right? But already you have done an amazing number of things and shaken the tree in multiple ways. So look forward to hearing what you have to say. Take it away.
Okay, great. Okay, let me cue the karaoke machine. Oh wait, wrong room, sorry. Christina, thank you for the kind introduction. Before I begin, I want to thank Keystone and the team for organizing this inspiring conference. The group of leaders, enforcers, advocates, and thinkers gathered in this room and throughout this conference is incredibly significant and important. But a particular thank you to Christina Kafara. Christina is a superlative and brilliant thinker, advocate, and friend, and somebody who has done extraordinary work building coalitions across the Atlantic. I can't think of another person in the world who could bring this group of people together to have this kind of conversation other than Christina. So thank you for that.
Wow, thank you.
So as a preview, I'd like to talk today a little bit about the role of platform power. But before I want to do that, I want to pause just for a moment, if you'll indulge me, and reflect on some of the recent and extraordinary work of my talented and dedicated colleagues at the Antitrust Division of the United States Department of Justice. Good. So our team is working harder than ever across so many aspects of antitrust and competition law enforcement. Merger enforcement. We are bringing the right cases for the right reasons. And the team is working so hard and generating real, tangible results. We've blocked or forced the abandonment of so many major mergers, including industries as varied as ocean shipping, publishing, industrials, professional services, government contracting, enterprise technology, and numerous others. These merger challenges have preserved competitive markets for citizens and stakeholders in all corners of our economy. Let me be clear here, we are just getting started. And this is not to mention the incredible deterrence effect that our program is having. But it's not just merger enforcement. We've advanced our efforts to revitalize and reinvigorate monopolization enforcement under Section 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. We've brought more cases in the last year under Section 2 than in the previous 25 combined. These cases involve markets touching the lives of so many Americans and citizens of the world, such as digital advertising, highway repair, cross-border shipments. And again, we are just getting started. And for the first time in nearly 50 years, we're bringing monopolization cases both as civil and criminal actions in accordance with the statute set forth by our Congress in 1890. We've also launched the broadest use of Section 8 of the Clayton Act, which prohibits interlocking directorates of corporate boards in the history of antitrust enforcement. I don't need to tell this crowd, but that interlocking directorates is one of the key drivers of corporate concentration over the last 40 years. We currently have 17 active Section 8 investigations, and to date, we have caused more than 14 directors to resign from corporate boards. Finally, we've added to our incredible team at the division. Over 100 new hires since I arrived, with more on the way. This includes attorneys, economists, paralegals, who are my favorite, but also includes new types of essential talent, technologists, data scientists, industry experts such as banking experts, and others. We are developing the expertise necessary to match the needs of a modern economy. I often remark that what we're developing is not unlike a business school faculty in terms of the diversity and depth of experience. And our business school dean is the incomparable Susan Athey, who is leading this effort. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. The work we're doing across affects everything from technology to supply chain to transportation to labor competition to procurement fraud, where our efforts have saved taxpayers in the United States billions of dollars. And it's a testament to the dedication, fortitude, raw talent, and passion of my colleagues at the Antitrust Division of the United States Department of Justice. And I go to work every day grateful that I have the opportunity to work alongside them. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I had the privilege of coming in with the wind in my sails. So I think Tim Wu is here. There he is. We have an executive order that not only encourages us to review the last 40 years to determine what has worked, but frankly what hasn't, but we are mandated to do so. We are mandated to work with agencies across the U.S. government to make sure that competition policy and statutes are being forced with effect and with purpose. We are mandated to revisit and reinvigorate antitrust enforcement. Also, I'm quite fortunate to work alongside an attorney general who's not only a brilliant antitrust mind in his own right, but has shown extreme and significant support for our reinvigorating antitrust enforcement and has been a great leader in our effort and inspiring. I say all of this not to spike the American football, as the saying goes, or to rest on our laurels. Far from it. I emphasize our progress to demonstrate how far we've come in just such a short period of time, but also to emphasize how much work we have left to do. And we must think critically and move purposefully as we advance. And so to that end, I want to continue a conversation that we started together right here last year about digital platforms and platform power. How do they work? How do they compete? How does market power play out? And what can and should be done to curb antitrust abuses? The first set of questions we need to ask is, how does competition present itself? And how does competition work in a particular industry? This, I've been working with our team, we are asking in every matter that we approach. The first question is, how does competition in this market present itself? What are the dimensions and dynamics of competition? Only then can we be effective as enforcers. This starting point, how competition is playing out in a specific market, is a critical one. But unfortunately, it's not always where antitrust analysis begins. Sometimes as a function of comfort, habit, or risk aversion, we have fallen into the trap of skipping this important foundational step. There can be a tendency at times to fall back on the comfort of a particular analytical framing or box that is familiar to us, that loosely describes the problematic conduct or merger-related concerns under investigation. But by failing to take a step back and understand fully how competition presents itself in a particular market, we miss the opportunity to consider whether the analytical tools that we're applying actually make sense in the context of that industry. Perhaps more problematically, we risk failing to recognize and act on anti-competitive conduct because it does not fall neatly with one of our frequently used boxes. But the forms of competition are as varied and dynamic as our economy itself. And so the tools, the analytical framework that we use needs to be just as diverse. Put simply, we can't fit facts into models. We need models that fit facts. So at their core, let's talk a little bit about platforms. At their core, platforms are often and frequently intermediaries. They can offer different products and services to different groups, both or all of whom depend on the platform to intermediate between them. Some platforms are two-sided. For instance, connect one user with a developer of a software application. But most, these days especially, are multi-sided and connect individual people with one another, even as it also connects them to various products and services. The opportunities for a platform are almost boundless. But so are the opportunities for anti-competitive behavior and anti-competitive harm. Here is where, to me, it is important to understand and focus on market realities. Platforms typically differ from traditional markets in some fundamental ways. First, platforms often benefit from economies of scale as they grow. These are not private highways, but instead grow in strength and value by inviting participation from others. Scale and related effects are particularly strong in platform markets. Indeed, there is often a temptation, and we often see many of these platforms start as open in order to induce participation and to gain scale and to gain those network and feedback effects that generate power and value. So what does that mean for competition? It means that these effects can often drive concentration in a platform markets or cause markets to tip in favor of a single dominant platform. Platforms can seek to achieve scale through a variety of both competitive and anti-competitive means in order to create a moat that leaves new entrants scrambling to keep up. For example, dominant platforms can build their power and deepen their moats through strategic mergers and acquisitions to block entry, for example, of nascent rivals, or through conduct that deprives rivals or disruptive threats of scale through, when they seek to do so through competition on the merits. In these markets, the cumulative impact of anti-competitive acts can be supercharged by network effects that cause those market to tip. And the whole of these effects, and this is extremely important, can be greater than the sum of its parts because every act and action in these markets is interrelated. Second, firms that own dominant platforms often get to set the rules of the road in unique ways. Many platform decisions, how to match users, the prioritization of users, products and content, the allocation of surplus and information and data accessibility influence the behavior of platform users and participants. But where a platform is dominant, these decisions may affect not only participants on the platform, but the very structure of the industry across a wide array of related markets. Critically, dominant platforms may be able to set those rules free from the discipline of a properly functioning competitive market. So how do these special characteristics of a platform market play out in our day-to-day work? Well, in the merger context, this means we need to be particularly mindful of transactions that impede the ability of market participants to meaningfully choose the platforms they want based on quality, price, privacy, security, innovation, and other competitive elements. Where a merger ties up one side of the platform market, limiting other platforms' ability to offer competitive product on the merits, competition can suffer in direct or in excess proportion to the entire platform. Where a merger impedes the ability of users to multi-home across platforms, the effect can be to drive out essential competition between platforms and create a deep competitive moat that insulates the platform from competition. As we think about our approach to mergers, platforms often do not neatly fit within the traditional horizontal and vertical geometries of competition. We must recognize that the distinctive nature of platforms, the distinct nature of platforms and apply analytical frameworks that reflect market realities. Often we think about antitrust as horizontal and vertical, up and down, thin like a piece of paper. But markets are not that simple. Markets are more like a gemstone, and they are multi-sided, multi-dimensional. What you see depends on which angle you're looking at. Competition can be often very difficult to measure in this kind of market, or market boundaries can be difficult to measure. But competition, the distance between competitors, can be easier to measure. How far one competitor is from another, how far a competitive threat is from the core monopoly. A similar story often plays out in conduct investigations, where dominant firms distort the competitive process in their favor to impede a rival's access on one, both, or many sides of a platform. Just 2.5 years ago, our Congress's House Subcommittee in the United States on Antitrust released a report observing, and I quote, "Dominant platforms in many cases have also integrated into adjacent lines of business, operating both as key intermediaries for third-party companies as well as direct competitors to them." It went on to observe that in recent years, significant reporting has documented how the dominant platforms can exploit this dual role through data exploitation, self-preferencing, appropriation of key technologies, and abrupt changes to platform policies. The subcommittee's investigation, and I should note, I think Congressman Ken Buck is here today, and Congressman Buck, along with Congressman Cicilline, did absolutely heroic work in bringing this information to the public, and it has had an enormous impact on this discussion and many others that are vital to revitalizing antitrust enforcement. And this investigation, independent of anything done by the Department of Justice or the Federal Trade Commission, uncovered numerous examples of exploitative conduct, suggesting that these are increasingly systemic rather than isolated business practices. This report is truly an historic document and has done so much to bring sophistication and to advance awareness of these important issues. So I'd like to focus now a little bit directly on one particular category of conduct that is often referred to as self-preferencing. To jump ahead to the conclusion, because sometimes I can't help myself, let me start by saying that the phrase self-preferencing often understates the competitive problem. In the United States, it's often misappropriated, this phrase, to lump anti-competitive behavior in with otherwise benign conduct, slapping a new label on it and calling it a day. But let's back up, though. Explain that what some people mean when they use the term. Some use the term self-preferencing to refer to conduct they perceive as ordinary. This might include a small firm showcasing its various products to customers, or often small firms offering basic discounts for multi-product purchases. But these practices can be so much more pernicious. Dominant firms facing an antitrust investigation regularly label their conduct as mere, quote-unquote, self-preferencing, ducking behind a perceived, but ill-advised, safe harbor they would like to attach to the term. They claim that such conduct is effectively immune from antitrust scrutiny in the United States. Sometimes this is presented as a tautology with no support cited. Other times, firms rely on twisted interpretations of case precedents, such as the U.S. cases of Trinco and Linkline, to contend incorrectly, I might add, that monopolists have an unqualified right to do as they see fit, regardless of the competitive impact, full stop. Of course, this is a distortion of the law. There's an old adage in antitrust, and forgive again the U.S. sports reference, but just because you own a baseball bat doesn't mean you have the right to hit somebody over the head with that baseball bat. Given this amorphous nature and labeling content as self-preferencing can end up obscuring rather than shedding light on the ultimate competitive analysis. At the division, our analysis does not turn on whether a particular flawed label could describe the conduct. Rather, our focus is on whether conduct has, had, or will likely have an exclusionary effect that causes competitive harm. This has been the heartland of antitrust case law for the past 100 years. In the context of platforms, as I noted earlier, competition can play out along many dimensions. There's competition for the platform, on the platform, and in many cases, competition to reduce the importance and relevance of the platform, in effect, eroding the power of the platform. The relevant question is most often not whether the firm has some unilateral duty to deal with customers. In most cases, as I explained before, platforms already made that choice. They've built a business that is dependent on dealing with ecosystems. Indeed, the very existence of a platform is to function as an intermediary that involves dealing with and induces participation of others. Rather, the question we should be asking is whether a firm has engaged in a discriminatory course of dealing that excludes competitors from the market. Such exclusionary discrimination can take a variety of pernicious forms in platform industries that share a common result: distortion and destruction of the competitive process. Platforms can engage in exclusionary discrimination to exclude competitors, current or nascent, that directly threaten to displace or disintermediate a core monopoly. Platforms also may engage in such conduct to exclude competitive threats and expand beyond the scope of their existing monopoly in order to create additional barriers to competition that might in the future challenge that core monopoly, or as a mechanism to exercise monopoly power after they've built and sustained that monopoly power through anti-competitive conduct. Whether discriminatory conduct excludes competition for the platform, on the platform, around the platform, or deepens that moat, the antitrust laws provide a mechanism for intervention. In the hopes of fostering a more meaningful dialogue on this issue, I want to share some additional thoughts about our current thinking here. First, courts have long refused to place form over substance when it comes to monopolization, recognizing that exclusionary conduct can come in many forms. As the Supreme Court explained, our Supreme Court in United States versus Grinnell, the Sherman Act condemns the attainment or maintenance of monopoly through anything other than superior product, business acumen, or historic accident. Those words do not encapsulate some overarching carve-out or immunity. It does cover, however, exclusionary discrimination. Indeed, the Supreme Court has rejected head-on arguments that the promotion of self-interest immunizes otherwise illegal conduct. In the Supreme Court case of Ottertail, our Supreme Court held that the Sherman Act assumes that an enterprise will protect itself against loss by operating with superior service, lower costs, and improved efficiency, and not by seeking to substitute for competition anti-competitive uses of its dominant economic power. Where a dominant firm opts to wield its economic power to engage in a discriminatory course of dealing rather than compete on the merits, absolutely it may run afoul of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Second, where a dominant firm engages in exclusionary discrimination that has had the effect of creating or maintaining a monopoly, whether in a dominant firm's core monopoly or in an adjacent one, we will not hesitate to investigate and, where appropriate, take action, regardless of the label that their firms or their defense counsel seek to apply. Our courts have long recognized that whether any particular act of a monopolist is exclusionary, rather than merely a form of vigorous competition, can be difficult to discern. But the means of illicit exclusion, just like the means of legitimate competition, are myriad. But instead of simply throwing up our hands, the inherent challenges this presents, our courts and our antitrust enforcement agencies have an obligation to dig in, to understand and assess the effect of new forms of competition within the context of the realities of any particular market. To that end, we must resist the urge to pigeonhole conduct into analytical boxes that fail to account for the specifics circumstances at issue. As our Seventh Circuit Court fairly recently observed, when confronted with potential anti-competitive conduct, We cannot allow those boxes to cloud our examination of the ultimate question, whether the conduct at issue harms the competitive process. As I mentioned earlier, dominant firms in platform industries often have a wide range of levers or dials at their disposal, each of which they can be flipped separately or turned, sometimes in dramatic ways, sometimes in subtle ways, to alter competitive dynamics and harm competition. Often this conduct is subtle, as I mentioned, or hidden from the marketplace entirely, which makes it all the more difficult to detect, investigate, stop, and monitor. If we assume platform operators are operating, as most do, as profit maximizing, share value maximizing, and valuation maximizing entities, then they have the incentive to flip these levers and turn these dials in ways that benefit their market position at the expense of rivals. And I don't fault them for having those incentives. But where we find a monopolist engage in anti-competitive conduct by pulling those levers, we can't simply ignore their ability and incentive to do so again in the future. To that end, it has long been the policy of the Antitrust Division, when appropriate, of course, to consider structural remedies. And this dates back to the breakup of Standard Oil and to the breakup of AT&T in 1982. The logic behind that stance applies to platforms just as much, if not more so, than any other industry. Structural relief can break the incentive structures that otherwise might encourage a platform to shift towards closed systems that exclude competition. Relief can reinvigorate incentives to interoperate and facilitate multi-homing by users across platforms. Structural relief also provides greater certainty to enforcers and potentially obviates the need for ongoing and invasive monitoring and regulation. If we move some of the levers out of reach and some of the dials beyond the reach of the monopolist's turn, even a profit maximizing, share maximizing, and valuation maximizing entity can't flip the lever or turn the dial. So where does this leave us? If you'll indulge me, I want to reach back to my country's founding. I'm a proud patriot, and I am a big believer in what we like to call the American dream. In the spirit of this conference, the antitrust laws have always been part of what scholars Joseph Fishkin and William Forbath call a constitutional political economy. The constitutional grounding began at our state level. Around the time of our founding, for example, North Carolina and Tennessee both had language in their state constitutions that monopolies, and I quote, are contrary to the genius of a free state. And this is not unique to those states. Many of our states have anti-monopoly principles embedded in their state constitutions. Since then, so many of our great political leaders, Frederick Douglass, Senator Sherman, Franklin Roosevelt, Senator Kefauver, understood this constitutional and political economy. They knew, as FDR put it, freedom is no half and half affair. Freedom in the workplace, in the marketplace, and the polling place all go hand in hand. Competition is central to a functioning and healthy democracy. These leaders leaned on the antitrust laws and competitive economy as a solution, just as we must today. The problems that we face today, like entrenched platforms and exclusionary discrimination, would have actually been quite familiar to our trustbusters of yesteryear. They might not understand the internet or even know what an API stands for, but they would know exclusionary conduct by a dominant firm when they saw it. And they know the solution then, just as we know the solution now, which is to restore competition to markets as a means to ensure freedom. Freedom for our economic liberty, freedom from monopoly across our economy and across our society. Yes, this is a tall order, but I have deep faith in our system. I have deep faith in this group and our colleagues around the globe, and I believe we are more than up to the task. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. What a note to finish on, really. We're only getting started. I want to invite the panelists for the next panel to join us, but I will ask you just a question. We're in Europe, and to be prosaic, we have tried to enforce in digital with results that are not exactly splendid. We've made an effort, but there has been, which is why we've pivoted to regulation. You are an enforcer. How do you see that? Do you think that there is a better chance there to succeed? And do you see regulation eventually playing a role?
So, as you point out, my job is to enforce the law. It's the job of others, including even some in this room, to write the laws. And so we'll enforce them appropriately. But ultimately, I firmly believe that in order to have effective remedies, you have to understand and diagnose the core problem. And so more often than not, that means addressing the core monopoly and making sure that remedies work in a way that is meaningful. And so we talked a little bit about the history of structural relief in the context of U.S. antitrust enforcement. In most instances, that will be the most reliable and the most successful way to remedy an anti-competitive problem. It's not to suggest it's the only way, but it is often the most successful and the most definitive.
Well, this is interesting and very important to hear. You're welcome to stay here. I will move to the panel.
Thank you, everyone, and good luck to you all.